Welcome to The Writing Life, the podcast for anyone who writes. I'm Steph McKenna from the National Centre for Writing here at Dragon Hall in Norwich, UNESCO City of Literature. It's September 2023 and event season is back in full swing at NCW. We've hosted 2 sold-out events with Margot Dwayhe and Rose Tremaine at Dragon Hall so far this month, and it was a great feeling to have so many book lovers and writers back in our venue. Make sure to check out the What's On section of our website, nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk, to see everything that's coming up this autumn at Dragon Hall and online, including book launches, performances, writing workshops and courses. For today's episode, I'm delighted to hand the mic to my colleague Rebecca DeWald, Programme Manager at NCW. A few weeks ago, Rebecca hosted an interview with Kalaf Epalanga and Daniel Hahn on the process of writing and translating Kalaf's exhilarating debut novel, Whites Can Dance Too. Told through 3 different voices, Whites Can Dance Too is Kalaf Epalanga's reflection on and celebration of the music of his homeland, the intertwining of cultural roots and freedom and love. Kalaf Epalanga is a musician and writer. Best known internationally for fronting the Lisbon-based dance collective Buraka Som Sistema, he is a celebrated columnist in Angola and Portugal. Daniel Hahn is a writer, editor and translator with over 100 books to his name. He has translated fiction and non-fiction for adults and children from Europe, Africa and the Americas. Rebecca chatted with Kalaf and Daniel about many aspects of writing and translating Whites Can Dance Too, including the structure of the book and whether it can be called non-fiction. They also discussed the process of translating music and different forms of Portuguese from Portugal, Angola and Brazil. So now I'll hand over to Rebecca in conversation with Kalaf Epalanga and Daniel Hahn.
Hello, thanks so much for joining me today, Kalaf and Danny, to talk about Whites Can Dance Too, which is a book Kalaf wrote and Danny translated for us from Portuguese into English. So dive straight into it. Can you tell me a little bit how the book came about, particularly because Kalaf, you're a musician to begin with, and this is your debut novel, and you can see I'm putting novel also in air quotation marks because I want to talk about this later as well. But yeah, Kalaf, can you talk about how you came to be writing a book, and then Danny, how did you come to be translating this particular book?
Thank you for having me. It's a book that I would say it started in a conversation about literature and music in Brazil. In fact, I'm in Brazil at the moment. So the conversation was with Agualusa in a panel. He invited me to come to Rio de Janeiro in a festival, a music festival, but they had a panel with music. And the conversation somehow ended up in Kuduro, Angolan contemporary music, urban music, electronic dance music. And the audience was quite shocked that I was talking about this modern aspect of Africa. And in the end of that panel, Agualusa told me, you should write the biography of Kuduro, which again is a genre that in Brazil is very popular. Biographies of samba, biographies of bossa nova. I love the concept of that, but immediately I was thinking, this will take forever because chasing Kuduro artists is almost impossible. I did that while trying to record them in Angola. So I say this is a lovely idea, but it's impossible to do it. But 5 years later, something like that, I decided to end up my band and finish my music activities, at least on stage. And I felt like our story was not told properly. So I felt like, okay, let me go back to that idea, that challenge that Agualusa gave me and try to tell about this music genre. But at the same time, I didn't want to write a biography per se. I decided to use my own story, my own perception, my own vision of the music. And in the middle of that, talk about migration in Europe somehow, because I'm a migrant. I arrived in Portugal when I was 17. And it's a subject that I like to talk about, but I find is important to talk about, especially now. So yes, that's how the book came about. Of course, there's more to say, but I just keep it to that.
So not a mean feat to cover all these things of like wrapping up your musical career and also writing about the history of migration in Europe and having a sort of autobiographical part of it as well. It's quite an undertaking for debut novel. Or is that maybe the advantage of being a debut author, that you don't know what you're getting yourself into?
Absolutely, and to be honest, especially because of Angolan culture, I felt if we had more books published on the subject, not only music but also Angolan history, would be easier for me. I felt like, especially on the Portuguese edition, like working with Danny was good because we somehow end up editing quite a bit. Because of that, it's like, again, you are writing your first novel and you have so much to say and you try to explain everything. So I believe that's the mistake I did on the first edition, but I finally got the chance to work again, and I was a bit shy. And then I think the publisher asked if I was okay to edit some parts, and then of course Danny was very kind and said like, "Yes, that's normal. Don't worry about." So we went for it.
So these edits were done on the Portuguese edition or on the English edition?
On the English edition.
Interesting. So Danny, how did the English edition come about, and how is it a very different book to the Portuguese book then?
The English edition came about. I mean, the gestation was either very quick or very slow, depending on where you want to start the story. I met Kalaf. I've only met Kalaf in person once, and we had dinner with Agualusa in Lisbon 10,000 years ago, before this book had been written, I think. And that was the only time we met in person. Actually, this I think is the first time we've talked. This at this moment is the first time we've talked since starting work on the book. We emailed a million times, but we haven't actually had a conversation where we can see each other's faces and hear each other's voices. So I'm waving, waving to you at this moment.
Amazing! You heard it here first.
This is it. So we met at dinner many years ago, and I knew his work. I read the book when it came out. I liked the book when it came out. And then a few years ago, I heard from Kalaf, I think through Twitter or something.
Yeah, I messaged you.
And from his agent, Emma Shercliffe, about their plans to find a publisher in the UK, asking if I would help out with that a little bit and also think about translating it, because I think they knew that I'd read it and was a fan. And so I worked with Emma a little bit on when she was figuring out publishers to send it to. And I also was in a very nice position of having already read the book, because I read Portuguese, of course, and many publishers here couldn't. And so when Emma started talking to Alexa von Hirschberg, who is the editor at Faber, I arranged to have a meeting with her as well. And I had a chat with Alexa and answered some questions about it. And I told her what I thought was great about the book. We talked, in fact, in that first conversation about whether I thought Kalaf would be amenable to doing some little editorial tweaks to it. And I said I didn't know, but I guessed. One of the things that I think is interesting about working with a musician is you can't not be collaborative. If you're a musician, you can't just think this is me, my own individual genius and my vision. You have to be used to the idea of working with other people. And so Alexa was very keen on what she heard about the book, and was, I think, pleased to know that if there was anything she wanted to talk to Kalaf about, maybe reshaping slightly, that he'd be up for that. And I was very pleased then to be asked to stay on board and translate it, which meant doing the sort of translation job, the sort of as it were, the usual translation job, which we can talk about, and then being a little bit involved at the stage where Alexa and Kalaf were working together on a few evolutions of the book, which actually, in some ways, I should say, required slightly less of me as a translator, because, as you can hear in this conversation, Kalaf's English is very good, and I didn't need to mediate actually between Alexa and Kalaf. And actually, there are some new little bits in the book, in the English edition, which Kalaf wrote in English and didn't need me, rather disappointingly. I'm slowly being made.
Yeah, but I was very suspicious, Danny. Every time I wrote a bit and you didn't say nothing, I said like, no, like this need like a revision. This needs editing. I was very shy to write, and I was at some point I was saying like, maybe I should just write in Portuguese and make Danny work, because.
And here's the translator thinking AI was the threat. It's the authors taking over.
Yeah, but I was not so sure about my sentences in English, but yeah, some of them stayed.
Had you read the English edition and then added your sentences to it? So did you like almost have your English voice in your ear when you were then writing your sentences in English in the first place?
Yeah. Again, as Danny was saying, I believe because of my music career and music mind, editing is also part of the process. Like album is edited and reshaped until we send to press. So I'm not like thinking, yes, I wrote the book, this is the story, just deal with it. No, I'm there. You know, if you give me space for it, I will work and rework until we got something. So it was nice also to have Danny, and he was kind of like the sign off. So if Danny was okay with it, yeah, we done with that. So yeah, but I enjoyed it.
And I'm pretty grumpy. I mean, I have to say that.
That was through email, so that was easy because like we didn't have debates so much, and was like, okay, this is the version, this is this chapter, or I worked this beat and this part. What you think, and so it was nice.
So was it entire chapters you added as well? Was it entire longer sections?
Sections, yes. For example, I give you an example. The book, I do a lot of ellipses. I don't know if you say like that, but it's not chronological. I was going in my Tarantino mode when I was working on it. But then, of course, this might work in Portuguese, and it's easier because also like in Portuguese, we are accustomed to really long chapters and just like stream of conscious and then do ellipses on that, just basically to play with the reader. But in English, the publisher asked if I could rework the chronology and find another flow. Is again, and that's, of course, if you change, you need to edit. Yeah, you need to rework a little bit the sentence because you lose the meaning, like the clever things that you put there, the hooks that you put there to, entertain the reader. Some, don't make sense anymore. So I had to rethink those beats.
It felt like that part of that is also, you're talking about the things that are working in Portuguese, but I'm thinking also about the things that are cultural rather than literary or linguistic, about how much, what are the things that a reader in Lisbon would know and recognize? Yeah. And what are the things you have to simplify for the reader who is not in Lisbon or not in Luanda or not in Rio de Janeiro? And therefore needing to clarify, I think. A lot of it feels like it's about clarity and making it possible for a reader who on page 1 of this book goes, Kuduro, I have no idea what that is, to give them something to hold on to before you can disassemble the chronology and play around, and there needs to be that that reassurance before that much more complicated, that sort of narrative seduction that happens with all the different bits of it.
You say reassurance, and actually I think I was going to ask about music first, but let's talk a bit more about the structure of the book. I picked up the book reading the first chapter. The author's called Kalaf. The narrator of the first chapter is Kalaf, who's a musician who plays in the band that happens to be the same band that Kalaf, the author, is in, and is on tour, traveling by bus from Lisbon to Norway, and loses his passport, his Angolan passport on the way, and then gets into trouble with the border police on the Swedish-Norwegian border, and ends up in a cell because the border police don't trust him. That's the first chapter, and I was reading it. Also, I guess the packaging is probably quite clever, because looking back at the English book, it only says that at the back in the author bio that it's a debut novel. And then I was like, hold on, debut novel. And I got to the second chapter, and suddenly you still think it's the same narrator. And at some point, Kalaf turns up as a character that the narrator mentions, and you're back in Lisbon a couple of years afterwards, and the narrator is Sophia.
Yeah.
And then the third chapter is narrated by somebody completely different, one of the border guards in Norway. So I was just wondering, what made you choose this structure that starts off ostensibly as non-fiction, or you could read it as non-fiction, and then definitely switches into thinking what the other characters might be thinking and the other people involved in Kalaf's story, and Kalaf then becoming, it's a bit of a Paul Auster thing, almost like the author becoming a character in the book. But what made you choose that blend of genres in that sense?
Yeah. When I start, the first thing I had was this dialogue between I would not say a criminal, but like the incarcerated narrator and the policeman. Yeah, so that was the first idea, to have this dialogue and someone trying to explain to the other, about his life and why he's innocent and all that. So that was kind of the premises that I started with. And on the process of working with that, I discovered that I was so much deep in music that I had to backtrack and give context. So that's how Sophia came about, to give context to everything. And for example, like I have this tendency of sometimes just pick random chapters and read it. And sometimes I'm absolutely in love with the first narrator, not because it's slightly based on my biography, but then comes the Viking, the policeman that arrested the first narrator, and absolutely love what we achieve with that in terms of. Again, I say we because, again, a book is not written just by one person. The one person maybe comes with the story and the words and the phrases, but then there's so much collaboration on the process that I cannot take that, let's say, title by myself. But then Sophia sometimes is really this narrator, this part that really holds everything together somehow, at least in my head. I feel like she's so important for the fluidity of the story, and gives a little bit of breadth, and also gives a female perspective on things. Again, I'm not saying that I'm good on writing female perspectives, but I tried, and yes, I hope I succeed. I have friends that sometimes I say things about like especially like the romance that is built there. And sometimes they say, oh yeah, this is a man writing, but I will not tell which parts they complain.
There's a really interesting experience, I think, for a reader. Just thinking about the first time I read this book, but also going back to it over and over, of the shift between that first section and the second section, which isn't just to do with Sophia having a different voice and rhythm, and the third section with the bodyguard having another different voice and rhythm. It's to do, I think, Rebecca, with your question about the assumptions we make about what category to put this book in. And you get through whatever it is, 60, 80 pages of something that it says somewhere on the back that it's a novel, but we could be persuaded that it's something else because of the territory it's covering, because of the name of the character and the biography of the character and the way in which it relates to what we know about the author. And so you can read it as, if not a memoir, at least that sort of autofiction that we know how to categorize. And then suddenly he does this thing where all of the rules of that break, and you turn the page and he steps outside this character who we think, wait a second, I thought I knew what kind of book this was. And suddenly this character, who is some version of our author, is in the third person. And the perspective is very different, the voice is very different, everything like that. And so I feel like there's a really nice, from a reader's point of view, there's a really nice kind of play of what we expect. The different ways these three characters talk about music and the different ways in which they are addressing us as readers. But I feel like, and I'm going to stage a little coup and ask Kalaf a question myself, if you don't mind. Yeah. I kind of feel like there have to be quite different challenges when you're writing, moving away from, I guess, that first voice, you know when you got it right, in a way.
Yeah.
Because it is, the character is not exactly you and the voice is not exactly yours, but there is a kind of, at least there's a kind of game you play with that.
Yes.
And as a reader, we think, I recognize the style, this is a kind of autofiction, this is a kind of voice. And then you turn a page and go, oh, I didn't know he could do that.
It's a bit of both, I believe. Like, I was definitely enjoying the process, but at the same time, I was also facing the restrictions of writing about yourself. All the characters are still alive. My siblings, my parents, even though I didn't include my siblings in the book, just because I didn't want to deal with, like on dinner families, like, oh, why you expose so much about our family history? So there's a lot of restriction on working with that, and I absolutely, like, yes, I will never write a biography in my life, just because you cannot tell everything. So I had to make it fun for me. Yeah, I had to jump on something that I was excited about, and as a reader as well, because again, writing about myself is not like I didn't reach that point yet that I can just be with zero filters. So those restrictions were drowning me in a way, even though I was absolutely in love with the process, the story, the music, also let's say the legal tribulations that I was going through at the time, and also reflecting on like visas and like migration and all that. So that process was like, even though it was stressful, but okay, I needed to say and I needed to write about that. But at the same time, I felt like the book needed a little bit more, not just like my perspective. I felt like, so why not bring more characters and carry on with this idea that, for example, again, one of the questions that I put myself was, if culture travels so fast and doesn't require, again, translation, doesn't require explanation, doesn't require borders, why us as humans, we have this tendency to just drown ourselves in bureaucracy and policies that sometimes even don't make sense in modern times, but somehow we just say, oh, it's tradition, this is how the law of the land is, so we stick with it. So all those things were kind of the broader questions that I was bringing in and trying to answer through those characters.
I feel like we need to talk about the elephant in the room, which is music, obviously. Because it struck me that also through using those different characters, that you're displaying different types of people's approach to music and how they like. There's almost two categories of people, I feel like, in the book. There's the people who love and live music, and that's what they live for. And then there's the occasional character who just listens to the radio or just doesn't mind what music's on. But simultaneously, you also have people who love and live music because they want music to spread and be listened to by everyone, and others who want to contain it and want to kind of keep it to themselves or kind of keep it to a certain country. So there's always that dualism between freedom, music and freedom as well. And the sort of understanding across the divide, I guess. I mean, you might want to even explain the title, Whites Can Dance Too, which I think exemplifies that as well.
Yeah. The title was also a gift by Agualusa. Agualusa is all over this book, to be honest. And so he had this proverb that I did a slight adaptation of it. But the proverb goes like, whites can sing or knows good songs as well. And basically, the meaning, I think I would say very, has some Jesus Christ, let's say, concept, like, we shouldn't judge anyone by their appearance. We shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Again, that's quite fitting for our conversation. And to be honest, like when I was crossing borders, I was always trying to explain. Like every now, like today, even though I do have European citizenship now, I don't need visas for most of the countries. But every time I go to a border, even with my European passport, I have this feeling that I'm an imposter. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't cross this space. And this, let's say, prison that we live in, and absolutely because of colonialism, capitalism, like we can go on and on and on and on to try to explain those reasons, but they do exist and they do stop people to enter certain spaces. And somehow music is the only thing, especially talking about African culture, Black culture, all over the world. Music is the language that somehow we was, I would say, to reclaim our humanity. That was the only art form that was left for us somehow. Yeah, we were denied education, we were denied access to places, but somehow we still had the drums, yeah, and our voices. Even though they were silent, but somehow you never lose that voice. Even if you are incarcerated in a prison, literally, you still can hum a song and you can still like go through your hardship just falling in music. And of course, if you look into the history of America, into the history of Brazil, music is what held this place together and gave an identity, even though this is not the first thing that people think about it when they think Americas, North and South. This is not the thing that people value the most, like the music, how music somehow shape a nation and shape identity or whatsoever. It's quite funny because when you see all these people that make laws traveling, they all are praising their musicians, their music and stuff like that. But somehow, and when it comes to access to education, access to life, like somehow these are overlooked. So those are the things for me, like that I found why music so important. Like why music somehow is our ultimate survival kit when we come to, explore the world.
There's something also, I think, in the book about the challenges to the kind of integrity of one's own voice that come from not being able to move about across borders. And however much, you have your music, you have a voice, that's always a thing that people can't take from you. The way in which one kind of music or one kind of voice is or isn't accepted in different places. Excuse me. The way in which one kind of music or one kind of voice is or isn't accepted in different spaces is very much contingent on the particular privileges that you have. There's a thing in the book about, how a band that can't just spend a summer in London gigging is going to build up a certain kind of international profile compared to a band that can. But I'm also thinking about the way in which there is a pressure to conform to what other people think of as what music is supposed to be. How do we understand it and how we talk about it? And there's a moment, Kalaf, in the first part of the book where the character Kalaf goes to a party in London and he's asked by someone, what do you do? Or what kind of music or something? And he says, ghetto dance music.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't want to explain, because ghetto dance music is a little bit similar, and it's a thing that she will have heard of. And later he thinks, why, I should have just said kuduro. But there is a need to kind of shape this thing to fit into what is expected and what is known by the people, by this kind of new audience. And it feels like when, Rebecca, you were talking about these two different kinds of ways of thinking about music, then there's also that dichotomy between people who are and aren't comfortable with going, here is this thing, it has its own language, its own integrity, its own rhythms, its own origins, and I'm not going to adjust it, shape it, soften the edges, apologize, explain very much for people who may not know it. It feels like this is a book about people trying to explain music to other people as well, right? There's a lot of, all three sections have a lot of people going, but you don't, the second section begins with, where does this music come from? And that's how this whole lovely relationship starts, with that question, where's Kizomba comes from.
Yeah.
I was absolutely going to ask that question as well, of so many characters ask, what is kuduro? What is Kizomba? Can you explain to our listeners who haven't read the book?
I will not have the tendency to use the word that that Danny just explained and simplify it. But I would say it's Angolan dance music. Yeah, that's what kuduro is, in fact. And Kizomba somehow is also Angolan modern music. In dialogue with so many other genres across the world. Yeah, in dialogue with Zouk from the French Antilles, in dialogue with, I'm talking about Kizomba, yeah, it's in dialogue with many, many other, again, the slave trade was a terrible thing, but the music did travel, the rhythms did travel, so they get different shapes. If you go to the Caribbeans, you see and listen to something that is somehow in dialogue with things that you have in Angola or in Nigeria, for example, which is now this global music hub that everybody is inspired with. And kuduro, again, is also a manifestation of something that I would say the lack of access to music instruments create hip-hop. And then hip-hop somehow had different ramifications, and kuduro is also one of them. The same also with DJ culture, two turntables. So you add records and you create music with records by sampling, editing, music, to create new pieces of music. Kudur is the same thing. That's the same thing. Yeah, it's just appropriation, reshaping, re-editing information that is already there. Yeah, I don't know if I.
and there's that really interesting mix of so many different kinds of influence, many of which, again, I think were new to me because I'm not from Angola and I didn't know a lot of the names were there. But there is that sense of it being incredibly rich because there's so much variety of things that's fed into it. Which also includes, like, one of the kind of very influential figures. I think you talked, Kalaf, about how did it start? It started because he wanted to be able to dance like Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
So, couldn't do that. And so tried singing and so there's this sense of all of these different kinds of, almost background noise happening at the same time.
Absolutely.
And then something completely unique is born from it, but it's born, though it's a unique thing, it's born from this incredibly rich and sometimes quite surprising mix of things.
Yeah, I absolutely enjoy, and to be honest, like I grew up in Angola, so I didn't have access to many of the things that were, let's say, in the West. Yeah, because Angola was part of the communist bloc, and we were more inclined to know things that coming from the Czechoslovakia, Cuba, and so on and so forth. And so when I came to Portugal, I had actually access to hip hop, like on a larger scale, not just like the mainstream, the things that somehow end up in Angola because of, again, the power of pop. And so many music, so many information came through that. Like my jazz introduction was through hip hop, to A Tribe Called Quest, to De La Soul, and also you end up finding out more about Japanese modern music or Japanese jazz or something like that, just because someone sampled a record, and then you go on and on and on, and it's like a rabbit hole. Just doesn't have an end. And I would say even like about the title also gives this idea that this privilege that we have in, let's say, in the West, that we basically think everything goes around the Western world. And again, it's not even my phrase, but I think the movie director Osman Sembene say like Europe is not my center, and for me, I'm dealing with this duality. I'm dealing with information that is so ours that I need to be aware and even like respectful, and also at the same time try to inform a world that doesn't know anything about the place that I come from. And it's so funny because when you say like whites can dance too, but I'm also trying to ask people to look at us at the same time. Yeah, is a play in words, but not just the words, but it's also like the meaning of it. It's so broader and so important for us to understand that, like, especially when, for example, like I believe, like when a Western travels to Asia, it's just like overwhelmed with this world of information and culture that didn't went through it, at least wasn't affected directly by, let's say, European values. Of course, in Africa, it's a little bit different, starting with language. But at the same time, there are so many things, even like going to countries, I speak Portuguese, my mother language. But when I'm traveling in Angola, the fact that so many of my cousins and uncles don't speak Portuguese fluently, but they are incredible storytellers, even better than me. They are way more entertaining telling stories. And by again, a terrible thing that happened to us, they're not able to write those stories. And I believe, like, when you say whites can dance too, at the same time you're also saying, yes, Africans or blacks know how to tell good stories too.
Absolutely. But also I feel like what you're saying, this kind of switch of like, it's also looking back at like, one culture looking at the other culture. I think what I find really fascinating about the book as well is I didn't know what kuduro was beforehand. So like, it's this idea of like writing, like learning about music, not through listening to music, but through the written word. And it's because I think, there's the category of like musical biography, but chances are you pick up a musical biography because you love the music and that's why you want to read the biography. But there's something about like this genre not being like, I think there's something that happens in the English translation or in English original of passages, obviously, because what is a translation? What is the original? That happens because of sort of English language Western ignorance of the genre of kuduro, that you then learn about music through the written word. But I wanted to ask both of you kind of how do you write about music, basically? Because it's a bit of this like crux about writing, which I think we always advise people, when you translate, read it out loud so you can hear the sounds of it as well. But a lot of people, inherently, it's a thing, as you in the book, and it's a silent exercise.
Yeah.
But then it's based on sound. So how do you bring the sound into the written word without hearing it on the page, if that makes sense?
I would say impossible. Yeah. And I think I would go there. And if I achieved that, was absolutely by intuition. But I would say that what is important while writing about music is coming close to that feeling. Yeah. That a feeling that is hard to explain. Yeah. It's like, again, even like, try to explain love. Yes, you can come closer, but when you are really in love and when you are feeling it, that is very hard to put in words. I would say poetry is the easiest, let's say, literary form to talk about music. But my goal was not really like to write about music, it was more to write about the feeling of enjoying music.
But I think that is how to write about music, isn't it? I mean, I feel like there are some things that can happen in this book and others where you're explaining, Sophia in the middle section, the guy she's with, sort of teases her for being a kind of anthropologist and needing to explain as an anthropologist where things came from and how they connect. But I feel like the thing that makes you understand music is understanding what it feels like to experience it. I'm thinking about, there's an Andrew O'Hagan novel called Mayflies, which is set partly in it kind of, young people and going to listen to music in a club in Manchester in the 80s. And it occurred to me reading that how good it was writing about music, despite the fact that it didn't explain, and then there is a chord progression, and then this is what happens in the middle eight of the song, and then there was none of that. But there was a really clear sense of what it feels like to be in a room when this song starts, or this track starts up. And Kalaf, you used the word feeling at the beginning of your answer. And I think if that's the thing that you can convey, if you can make people understand what it feels like to be drawn onto the dance floor by this particular beat, which is not easy. It's also hard to describe what it feels like to, taste coffee or to, see a sunset. Anything is difficult to describe that is not built in words. But I feel like that's the things that the things that convey music are about conveying what it feels like to hear it, or to feel, the rhythm and the soles of your feet, and trying to explain it any other way, at least for me, slightly misses what is important about it, which is what it does to you.
So did you, Danny, when you were translating it, did you listen to Kalaf's music? If anybody wants to look it up, Buraka Som Sistema has got, I think there's Spotify playlists. Other playlist providers are available as well, but I did look it up and had a listen in the background as well. But is that something that you did as part of your research, or were you like, actually, I want to just be carried by the words that convey the feeling without actually listening to the underlying music genre?
There was a bit of both. I did. A lot of it is in the writing. I think that the first, second, and third voice have slightly different rhythms to them. I think that's a thing which in some ways it's easier to accentuate in English than it is in Portuguese, but there's something that's different in the rhythm of the voices themselves. But I did get led to a lot of music I hadn't heard, partly because it's quite hard to resist it once you're led to it, and partly because there were a few, concretely it was useful to understand this. I watched, videos that are being described and try to get a sense of exactly what these movements were.
And
but also when there was music that I did know, because there was some music in here that I know very well, that I knew very well even before starting. It's interesting how kind of immediately you connect to those moments and in the book if you already have a really close connection. So I tend to know, old Brazilian music more than I know new Angolan music.
Yeah.
And also, I feel like my perspective has changed now. But there's a moment in the second book in the second section where, someone puts on a Chico Buarque song and it's Pedaços de Mim, and someone says, oh, that's the greatest song about loss that's ever been written. And I know every word of that song, and it is one of the great songs about loss, and it's very deep in my bones, that song.
Yeah,
I didn't need to look anything up, but I had a really like an immediate kind of shortcut. Like it's wired directly into the brain. That, and so there are some things that I felt I learned and I explored, and especially it's interesting coming back to when we got to the end of the process and I was looking at final proofs, by which time I'd been listening to some music that had been new to me 3 months ago and is really not new to me anymore, and seeing the extent to which you kind of internalize, because it's based on your relationship to the music. It's not just something inherent in it. It's something about the relationship you have to it.
And also it's important to note that this music, some of, like part of it, and maybe like the large part of it, it's impossible to listen like while on your desk. Yeah, so you might just listen to it just as, okay, let me just have an idea what it is. But the full experience, you need to be in a room full of people. You need to see how people move to it. Yeah, and even myself, like I'm a poor kizomba dancer. And even though I enjoy to listen at home, and because it's like a down tempo compared to Kuduro, which is like 140 BPM, so it's very hard to listen at home. Like, unless, of course, you try to clean up the house, and that's very useful. But listening in a club, in a dark room, loudspeakers, that's where you should experience per se. Yeah, so yes, like people are not. I don't force people to listen to it just because the book goes around that music genre. But yes,
unless you have some frantic cleaning to do, of it's very good advice.
But I think it does. I mean, I imagine if people say to you, Kalaf, the book really made me want to listen.
Yeah.
To discover more about Kuduro, discover more about Kizomba, to listen to things I hadn't heard about.
Yeah.
Presumably that is...
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not only not a bad thing, I
really absolutely love, and there are so many people that come to me praising for the playlists. I'm a musician, so making playlists is hard, I would say, because again, you have millions of songs that you can put in, and then you have to again find the time and say, okay, 2 hours, that's reasonable, yeah, for a listening experience. But yes, people do enjoy playlists, and I have tendencies to make them just to please the people. Yeah, I think
It's
that's
funny when you started that sentence, said, making playlists. I'm a musician, and so making playlists is. I thought you were going to say easy, and then you
no,
said it's hard, and then it made me think of there's that line. The writer Thomas Mann said something like, "A writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people."
Yeah, I do believe that.
I think there's something about
having all the knowledge and choosing. I'm definitely one of the people who would appreciate a playlist, because I was looking at the back being like, where's the QR code so I can listen to it alongside it? And also because there's so many particular songs for particular scenes that really set the mood.
Yeah, there's a playlist with the title of the book on Spotify that people can go to.
We'll see whether we can link that to the podcast episode as well. I did have another question about, because Sandy, you were talking about earlier saying some of the descriptions might have been easy in English, and actually, because one of my questions was about the different types of Portuguese that underlie the book as well, because obviously we go from Lisbon to Angola and back, and then there's also in the second chapter there's a Brazilian visitor coming in, who also at some point the conversation is about sort of how people express certain things in the different Portugueses they are. I was just wondering how you kind of dealt with those in English, Danny, as well, and also Kalaf, whether you're using people speaking in their how pronounced is it in the Portuguese that people speak very different. I don't know much about Portuguese, and I don't know how different the different Portugueses are in that sense. So is that something that creates a boundary or a bridge between the characters as well?
Yeah, there's a difference. I would say, for example, the obvious ones is how, let's say, an Angolan will build a phrase. We can go to extremes. For example, the use of plural in Angola is very, I would say, most of the people are bilingual, and there's no plural in most of our languages. We have 6 major languages, and all of them, the use of plural is not really. I don't know how to use the grammatical term of that, but there's a term that explains that. But yeah, I would say those are the obvious ones, and for example, I found that a lot in Brazil as well, because of the influence again of African languages as well. So people build sentences differently in a way, the way you place the subject and the adverb and things like that. But since this book, when I was writing, I wanted to go through stream of conscious, and then when the characters were, most of them, into this process of stream of conscience, we changed a little bit, and I put some of those parts into dialogues, direct dialogues. But when you are thinking or when you are dreaming, you have your own voice, so you don't really for example, when I'm thinking and dreaming, my English is spotless like Danny's. But when I'm speaking, things go slightly different. Yeah, so I'm a better English thinker than actually speaker.
One of the things about the Rebecca, your question about the various Portugueses in that second part, which is largely a scene between a young Portuguese woman, and a man she meets who's from Brazil. One of the things that in a way made it easier to translate that distinction is the fact that they talk about it. Is the fact that there are several moments at which they refer to the difference between their languages. And from a translation point of view, that's relatively easy, at least in this case, because it's sort of obvious in this conversation what the default is. Because they're in Lisbon, she is our narrator. And if there is a Portuguese that is not hers, then it gets explained to her. And so she and Guido Ribeiro have a conversation, and every once in a while he says, in Brazil we would call it, she's using some word or other for kitsch and tacky, and he says, we'd say brega in Portuguese, in Brazil in Portuguese, or where she says something, and he says, we would say that, but we'd say with, porra, for extra emphasis. In Brazil, that's how we would do it. And so even the language becomes becomes another example of the characters having to explain things to each other, becomes a very neat way of conveying this new thing to a reader. And it's quite, when it happens, it's quite explicit and it's quite sort of explained, which surprisingly makes it easier for the translation.
Yeah, because I get that, because it becomes the subject of conversation, and you don't have to like slip it into your English translation as you maybe sometimes do, like, they're speaking in different versions of the same language, which they are aware of, but use the English reader who's getting one English and maybe not aware of. Because there's something, I mean, there's those, but there's also Cape Verdeans who live in Portugal, and presumably they have maybe an accent, or maybe different inclinations, different sentence structures, all of that.
The funny thing about Cape Verdeans, I'm very envy of them, because most of them speak Creole directly. For example, in school, at least in Lisbon, and it's not like all Portugal, but in Lisbon, the younger generation, non-Cape Verdeans, they adopt Cape Verdean Creole just because the teachers don't understand. So it's kind of like a second language that the students talk, because again, the influence of rap, and also you want to be cool with your, peers. So Creole is the most spoken language. It's the second largest language in Lisbon because of this new generation. And they speak fluently. And I laugh so much when I see, again, white Portuguese through and through, never left the country, doesn't have any, let's say, different culture background or whatsoever, and they are fluently in Cabo Verdean Creole. And I wish I had that with Angolan. We have words here and there in the Portuguese that are coming from Kimbundu or Umbundu. For example, that's way larger in Brazil. Like the influence of Angolan is way larger. Like so impressive that. So I'm having fun here, to be honest.
We should say you're joining us from Brazil this morning, very early in the morning for you, not quite as early morning for Danny and I. My last question is, what are you working on next? And I'm wondering whether being in Brazil is partly work related. Are you researching the next book? Are you still making music, or is that something? Is that past Kalafa and future Kalafa as a writer?
No, I'm producing. I'm actually producing a Cabo Verdean artist. That's why I'm so immersed in Cabo Verdean culture now, and it's lovely. And of course, I listen to the music. Cesare Evra is always like something like that everybody should listen to. But yes, I'm in Brazil in a literary residency at Goethe Institute in Bahia. So it's very, and I was, it's my third time here. And when I traveled to Brazil, I always went to São Paulo and Rio and never really ventured into Bahia. But last year was my first time in a literary festival. And now, of course, I don't have a story. I didn't brought a story. Maybe I will end up with a story. And I brought some short stories that I want to indulge while here. Let's see what I can come up with.
That's exciting. I also like that because Quito, the character from Brazil, is from Bahia, isn't he? So like,
It's
I
from
like that.
Bahia, yes.
But that you hadn't been. So like, real
I
life
know.
is catching up with fiction.
No,
Yeah.
it's a true character. He is a writer and a filmmaker, and yes, he's from Bahia. And I met him like when last year when I was here. I was with him, so it was absolutely lovely. And I think he's coming back. It's coming back this month. Also, I think we will meet again here. And there's so many. Again, to explain Bahia, it's like I'm feeling like I'm in my hometown. Just to give you an idea, like how intense that is. Like I'm feeling like I'm in Benguela, like the way people walk, the way people talk, and of course, it's also like being like in an African New York, sort of speak, because of the influence from so many other parts of Africa. Yeah, you have the Yorubas, you have like people from Benin, like, and all that is visible. Yeah, you see and you feel it on the religion, you feel it on the food, in the music, on the rhythms, and the shapes of the bodies, and all that. So it's quite impressive.
That's amazing. Well, we're looking forward to the short stories that are coming out of the residency. Danny's also nodding. Have you got an eye on translating more of Kalaf's work?
I will never say no, given a chance.
Thank you.
We survived this first one, and it will be amazing to do more. It was a huge pleasure to do this book.
It was also a huge pleasure to talk to you both. Thank you very, very much for joining us on the Writing Life podcast today. And thanks to Daniel Hahn and to Kalaf Epalanga for being so generously talking about Whites Can Dance Too, which is available in every good bookshop now.
A big thank you to Kalaf, Daniel and Rebecca for their time. And make sure to pick up a copy of Whites Can Dance Too from your local bookshop or library. If you have any questions or you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Writers Centre. We're on Facebook, or you can drop us an email at info@nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk. Don't forget, you can find out more about National Centre for Writing over on our website, nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk, and you can also sign up to our weekly newsletter. As a UK-registered charity, we rely on the generosity of our supporters to make our work possible. You can make a donation today over on the website by going to the Support Us page. Please do subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and a positive review because it helps other people to find us. Thanks again, keep writing, and I'll catch you on the next episode.